President, I am really working hard with my colleagues here. I see Senator Durbin coming to the floor to make a law that we all know is the right thing to do. In fact, in my 8 years in the U.S. Senate, I don't think I've ever been involved with a matter that more desperately cries out for a just resolution to a simple issue. And it's this: do we as the United States Senate want to help sick United States Marines and their families, or do we want to allow a legislative bill that continues to further enrich trial lawyers in America? That's the question. That's the law I am working hard with many of my colleagues to make happen. And I think everyone knows the answer. Everyone in this body knows what the right thing to do is. Every American watching knows what the right thing to do is, and that is to help the brave Marine Corps heroes and their families who have sacrificed for decades to serve our nation. I've spoken to many of my colleagues, many of my Democratic colleagues in particular, and I know in their hearts that they also recognize we need to fix this problem. So what I'm asking my colleagues to do, particularly my Democratic friends, is this: help me fix it. Now, I want to say something. You're going to need a little courage, like the Marines that we're helping. You have a constituency that really does not like my legislation. The Trial Bar of America, we know they're very powerful. We know that most of my colleagues don't ever want to cross them, and they certainly don't want my bill to pass. But again, I ask my Democratic colleagues, have courage, do the right thing, work with me on fixing this problem. So, Mr. President, what's the problem? Well, I've spoken on the floor about this problem, usually in angry tones, because it burns me up. And any American watching who understands this, almost immediately it burns them up. And the Marines and their families, it burns them up as well. But to be honest, Mr. President, this afternoon I'm really down here more in terms of sadness and disappointment rather than anger. But I'm going to explain it once again. And if you're watching on TV or watching back at home, give a call to your senator and say, hey, fix this injustice. This is a real easy issue to fix. Here's the problem. We, a couple months ago, passed here the PACT Act, which was legislation to help military members who have been sickened by burn pits. This is an issue that I've been focused on my whole Senate career, starting with bipartisan legislation several years ago with Senator Manchin, Senator Klobuchar. So that was good, important, expensive, but important. We got to take care of our veterans and our military. To me, that's the #1 priority we should be doing here in the Senate, which is why a provision of the PACT Act to provide compensation for Marines who were sickened by contaminated water at Camp LeJeune was also considered in the PACT Act. That was important. We should do that for these Marines and their families. Marines serving in the 1970s, 1980s at Camp LeJeune. So far, so good, Mr. President. That's what's happened. But as the legislation of the PACT Act and the Camp LeJeune Marines Compensation Act started to become clear, something reared its ugly head. And what reared its ugly head was the legislation was more of a gift to America's trial lawyers than it was to sick Marines. Now, we've all seen these ads. As a matter of fact, this morning on the radio, I heard a couple of them already. You can't go anywhere, turning on the TV, without a lawyer asking Marines to call to get them to help under this Camp LeJeune Compensation Act. Here we are. We've seen it. Everybody's seen it. We had a VA hearing about a month ago. I asked the VA, how much you think trial lawyers have been spending? This is a month ago. They estimated well over $1 billion a month ago. $1 billion. $1 billion. You think that $1 billion is going to go to sick Marines and their families? It's not. It's not, Mr. President. Now look, I don't blame the Marines who are dialing these 1-800 numbers. They're getting bombarded. If they're sick, they think this is the way that they're going to get cured and get their money. That's not the case, Mr. President. A lot of these are scams, and we know it. A lot of these are scams. The problem, Mr. President, right now is if a Marine calls one of these numbers, there is no limitation on what the trial lawyer representing the Marine can take out of the Marine's award. No limitation. No cap on contingency fees. No cap on anything. And here's the real problem. Everybody saw this problem coming. That as opposed to the Marines getting compensation for being sick, the trial lawyers of America would be enriched. Everybody saw it coming. And to their credit, the Biden administration saw it coming. So the Justice Department of the Biden administration had recommended in their technical assistance to us here in the Senate that there should be caps on these awards for trial lawyers. Makes sense. This is the Biden administration Justice Department. Friends of many of these law firms. But they knew it was the right thing to do. They said 10% caps on contingency awards and 2% for filing fees. That was the Biden administration's recommendation. Now, Mr. President, that didn't happen. I won't go into all the bloody, gory details, but as we tried to amend the PACT Act, we wanted an amendment to do that. Biden administration did, the veteran service organizations did, because it was pretty simple. If there's a cap on fees for the lawyers, the Marines are going to get more. If there isn't, the trial lawyers are going to get more. We worked it hard, unfortunately, and sadly, really sadly, my Democratic colleagues blocked all those amendments when we tried to pass the PACT Act. So what's happened? What the Biden Justice Department predicted, what we all predicted, it's happening. Billions of dollars of ads, see them every day, hear them every day, every night, and Marines getting crumbs, trial attorneys getting rich. Mr. President, that's just not right. There's not one senator who knows that that is the right thing to do. This is an injustice right now in America. And already some Marines have lost money because of these scams. Some of these firms are promising big paydays. Of course, they're asking for money up front. A recent media story highlighted a Marine in Kentucky whose face was actually used in an ad claiming he had received a $35,000 settlement. In fact, he told a reporter he got 35 cents. Okay, that's not justice. So, of course, right now, Mr. President, the VA, local governments, veterans groups are frantically trying to warn Marines and their families, hey, don't listen to that. And Congress, please help us. There's reports that some law firms are charging 50 or 60% contingency fees. Are you kidding me? The veterans groups, the VA itself, the Biden administration VA, are crying out for help. Help. No more scams. Here's what the American Legion said at a recent meeting in a resolution they passed. Whereas predatory law firms charging exorbitant fees have engaged in aggressive marketing campaigns hurting veterans, the American Legion urges Congress to provide the necessary oversight for the implementation of the Camp LeJeune Justice Act to ensure veterans receive fair compensation. That's the American Legion. I'm a member. The VFW has also come out in support of what we're trying to do. So this should be simple. This should be simple. So what does my bill do? What does my amendment do, Mr. President? I'm going to explain it briefly here. The full name of my amendment, my bill, is the Protect Camp Lejeune Victims Ensnared by Trial Lawyers Scams Act, the VETS Act for short. And it's pretty simple, Mr. President. First of all, it just goes back to what the Biden administration had recommended in terms of a cap. Everybody here agrees there needs to be a cap on contingency fees. They had mentioned 10%, as I mentioned, on contingency fees, and 2% cap for filing the necessary paperwork. Now, my good friend, the senator from Illinois, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Senator Durbin, respectfully, I think he's going to speak and say, well, wait a minute. The normal fee is 33.5%, 1/3. Contingency fees. That's actually correct, but this isn't a normal fee. The reason the Biden administration had a low contingency fee at 10% is that the lawyers who are going to receive and help Marines get these benefits aren't going to go through big trials. They're not going to go through discovery. It's almost an administrative procedure process to check some boxes. The government doesn't even have a defense in this. So that's why 33.33%, the standard fare for contingency fees, has no place in this legislation. No place in this legislation. This is a government administrative process that's going to be made easy, supposedly, in the bill for Marines, sick Marines, to recover compensation and their families. So when you hear talk about, no, it's got to be 1/3, that's just not true. The Biden administration recommended 10%. So don't be fooled by that, Mr. President. Americans watching, don't be fooled by that. So here's another thing. That's the key to my legislation. The other thing we're saying is, because the compensation will come out of other benefits that the veterans receive from the VA, we make sure that the contingency fee is based on the net award, not the total award. And again, that's to serve the Marines and their families, not the trial lawyers. Let me give you one final thing my legislation does, Mr. President, and I don't think there's any senator who disagrees with this. And I'm pretty sure the chairman of the Judiciary Committee does not disagree with this. Somehow, when the VA implemented regulations on the implementation of this legislation, they issued a reg that makes sure the trial lawyers get paid before the sick Marines and their families. Say what? Yes, right now. Now that's crazy. Everybody, including lawyers, know that the client gets paid and then the client pays the lawyer. It shouldn't be the lawyer gets paid and then the client gets paid. That's crazy, especially if the client is a sick United States Marine. And I even think my colleague, Senator Durbin, agrees with that. So that's the other piece of this legislation. And Mr. President, we could fix that overnight by having the Secretary of the VA take a relook at that reg, saying, hey, that's wrong. Let's rescind that. I'd welcome if Secretary McDonough would do that. But, Mr. President, I'm going to keep fighting for this issue. This is an urgent issue. Payments under the Camp Lejeune Act will start early next year. The ads that we saw that I showed you here are likely to intensify over to the holidays. to try to ensnare even more Marines into these schemes. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to withdraw my amendment. I am not going to force a vote on this amendment this afternoon because I want to get to a law. And I had a feeling that, unfortunately, my amendment was not going to get passed in this Senate on this vote this afternoon. So I want to work with Senator Durbin, Senator Blumenthal, other members on the other side of the aisle to do what we all know is the right thing, to pass a law that emphasizes what we all thought the bill was doing in the first place in the PACT Act, to take care of sick Marines and their families, not enrich trial lawyers. Again, I urge my colleagues to work with me. Like the U.S. Marines, have courage to stand up to powerful interest groups who are trying to take more money from individuals who deserve it. Work with me on this. It's the holiday season. Let's give the Marines and their families the gift that they deserve and have earned through courage and sacrifice, not the lump of coal and breadcrumbs, which is the result of this bill that dramatically focuses on enriching trial lawyers at the expense of U.S. Marines. I'm committed to work all weekend, all next week, but we need to get this done before we finish this Congress at the end of the year. Every American knows it. Every U.S. Senator knows it. It's the right thing to do, and I certainly hope my colleagues are going to work with me to make it happen. I yield the floor.
The Majority Whip.
Mr. President, at the outset, let me thank my colleague from Alaska for his service to the United States, excuse me, for his service to the United States of America in the Marine Corps. And let me thank all the women and men who served in the Marine Corps and all other branches of our military service. We owe them a great debt of gratitude, and we certainly owe them justice. What is at issue here is the discovery that the water that they were drinking while they were training at Camp LeJeune was poisoned, and it was endangering the health of the Marines and their families. For years, they sought compensation and protection and failed, and just this last year, we passed the PACT Act, and under that provision of law, finally gave a cause of action to these Marines and their families to recover for the damages they'd suffered because of this poisonous water at this U.S. government facility training camp at Camp LeJeune. Now, I voted for that proudly, and it was a strong bipartisan roll call, as it should have been. But let me make sure you understand, and everyone understands, what these Marines who believe that they have been damaged by this poisoned water, this contaminated water, have to go through now to recover even the first dollar. The first instance is they don't receive it automatically. The senator from Alaska continues to refer to the Biden administration standards of 2% and 10% and so forth. He's quoting from a hypothetical that dealt with a compensation fund, not what we passed here in the United States Senate. Compensation funds like the 9/11 victims. We understand those cases. It wasn't a question of the victims going in and proving that 9/11 actually occurred or that their loved one was killed. It was almost an automatic thing that you qualify for. So the low contingency fees, which he quoted, was for a hypothetical approach, which is not the law. What is the law today? What if my father or someone in my family, my son, had gone through camp training at Camp LeJeune in the period of time that's affected by this? How do they recover? There are two avenues to recovery. One of them is file a claim with the United States Navy, and the Navy can decide that the claim is meritorious and pay it. But if the Navy does not pay it, the administrative hearing does not result in a payment to the plaintiff, to the claimant, to the Marine, the next step is a serious one. It goes to the federal court. Not just any federal court, but one we designated, the Eastern District of North Carolina. And what happens at that court? That Marine now is walking into a federal courtroom and has to establish a case and prove the liability of the government for his losses. What does he have to prove? Well, he has to prove causation, liability, and damages. Have you ever been in a federal courtroom? Want to walk in there by yourself and see what happens? I'm telling you, it's a humbling experience even for a trained lawyer. I've been through it. And I'll tell you this, I wouldn't want to go through it with something as serious as recovering damages for health care costs or injuries to someone dear to me and my family without adequate legal representation. What does it cost to get this representation? Well, there's no requirement that the Marine hire a lawyer at all. But if they do, the ordinary course of business says that they're going to pay a contingency fee, which means you don't pay the lawyer up front. The lawyer basically represents you, and if they recover, then you recover. But if they don't recover anything for your claim, they're empty-handed as you are empty-handed. That's the nature of a contingency fee. So the senator from Alaska came to the floor about 2 weeks ago, raising this issue, and I said, let's work on this together. And I want to say our staffs have worked on it together, and I'm sorry that we haven't reached an agreement. But here was the proposal that I put on the table and the reason for it. First, on the contingency fee. If you're just going to go to the Navy and file your administrative claim, we put a cap on the contingency fee that the lawyer is paid of 20%. 20%. Where did we get that? From the Federal Tort Claims Act. That's the percentage that's used now under the law. And then we said if you have to go to a trial in a federal court, the maximum attorney's fee is 1/3 if you recover. If you don't recover, you don't pay. It's a contingency fee. Now, the senator from Alaska has said, well, let's do 2% and 10% instead of 20% and 33%. So what can you buy for 2% contingency fee or a 10% contingency fee? Well, you can probably buy a lawyer who's never tried a case in court. You could buy an attorney whose office is in the trunk of his car. You can buy an attorney who will put the veterans file at the bottom of the stack because there's so little money involved in it. Or you can buy an attorney who will say, my paralegal in Singapore will get back to you later. That's what you get if you try to get by with 2% and 10% when the ordinary course of business is 33 1/3%. You're doing the veterans no favor by saying that they can't pay any more than 2% contingency fee if they can't find a good lawyer. And I'm sorry to say you won't find a lot of good lawyers at a 2% contingency fee. That's just the reality. So we went to the senator from Alaska and said, we will cap the contingency fees. 20% administrative case, no more than 33 1/3% contingency fee if the case goes to trial. Then we went further. He raised a point that I think is a valid point. How does the Marine know he's going to get paid? We think the lawyer will be paid, but will the Marine be paid if there's a verdict or a settlement? We put in language that said definitely the Marine has to be the first paid. We offered that to the senator from Alaska. We went further. There's a bill pending before the United States Senate, bipartisan bill. This bill, Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut and Senator Bozeman of Arkansas, a Republican, have come up with a bill that says those people who are ripping off veterans, unaccredited groups that are ripping off veterans by making them pay fees to collect the benefits they're owed by law, ought to be criminally liable. There's a criminal fine in that bill. So those are the three things we offered to the senator from Alaska. Not that he'd go away empty-handed, but he'd get a result and get that result in a timely way. We made that offer over the last 2 weeks. He did not accept it. I wish he had. I'm still going to work with him to reach that goal so that we can make sure that all the men and women who are affected by the Camp Lejeune contaminated water get compensated with competent attorneys who can represent them in court effectively and recover for them. We're doing them no favor if we limit the contingency fee and they can't hire a competent attorney. That's the maximum amount, 20 and 33, but it's certainly within the realm of ordinary practice. So I would say to the senator from Alaska, the offer I made 2 weeks ago, I make to you again now. Let's fix this problem. Let's not trade speeches on the floor of the Senate. We both feel intensely about our point of view, but we share one common value that I think we ought to make very clear here. We want these Marines to be compensated. That's why we passed the PACT Act. We want to do it in a way that they're not exploited. I abhor those attorneys, or even those who are not attorneys, who are trying to exploit these individuals. Let's work together to put an end to that once and for all. And let's do it in a timely way. By the time we get back here and consider legislation, it'll be almost February, another 6 weeks or longer, and time is wasting. I would just say to the Veterans Administration and all the veteran service organizations, warn all of those who would be plaintiffs in these lawsuits not to be taken in by anyone who is going to cheat them. Make sure that they are treated fairly, and we can do our part too. Let's pledge together to get that done in the new year. I yield the floor.
Senator from Alaska.
I want to thank my colleague from Illinois, and he has my full commitment to try to get this done before we leave. And I'm willing to compromise on some of these issues. But he makes a good point. With the Senate schedule, we're not going to be back here almost till the end of January. And by then, some of these payments are starting to be awarded. And we do not want, and I think the senator from Illinois agrees with me, situations where payments are going 50, 60% contingency fees. Nobody wants that. We shouldn't want that. That is just unfair. And this regulation at the VA is also ridiculously unfair, favoring trial lawyers over sick Marines. So the senator from Illinois has my commitment. I'll work day and night on this issue to try and get it done before we leave. Before we leave. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of Marines, sick Marines and their families, who are going to get ripped off. And we know that's going to happen, and we shouldn't allow it. But I will work with the senator from Illinois. He's got a lot of power as the chairman of the Judiciary Committee on this important issue that I think we should all care about. So I appreciate his comments, and I will redouble my efforts on this topic. Thank you. I yield the floor.
Mr. President, I ask recognition.
Senator from Illinois.
I want to close by thanking the senator from Alaska. Republican, Democrat, but committed to the same values. Make sure that these Marines and their families are treated fairly. We currently have 14,000 pending claims. These Marines have 2 years from when we passed the law back in, I believe, June or July, to file their claims. There's going to be a mountain of claims involved here, and we've got to make sure that we do it in a thoughtful way, in a timely way, and fair to the Marines every step of the way. And I'll be part of that effort with you, Senator.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.